Evolution.org Hardcore 2.0, episode 165. We're talking about front loading. Does it work and how with Beligas? So in this one, it's going to be a really good episode. We got Mobster and we got Noah Wicks on here. And we're talking about what is front loading. We're going to compare it to kickstarting. We're talking about the history of front loading. We're talking about different strategies of Beligas front loading. We're talking about why we like Beligas. But first, let me remind everyone that we are on Spotify, we are on Apple, we are on other platforms. So I don't know where you're listening to us now, but wherever you're listening to us, I like to listen to this show on my car while I'm driving. It's actually quite entertaining. And so I like kind of like to listen to the show myself and just learn, some of the stuff that I've done and Monster's done and Noah's done and
Yep.
trying to get the
Yep.
show better. So you guys and gals out there, I know you're listening to it. So
Mm.
wherever you're listening to it, make sure you're smashing the like button, make sure you're commenting, make sure you're dropping us some reviews. The reason for that is the way the algorithms work on these platforms. The more people that review and like and sub and all this good stuff, the more that we get more views and the more that the podcast goes around. Because if we're not going to grow and get more listeners, then we're not going to be able to keep this going. So if you want to get this podcast keep going, you've got to help us out by doing all those good things.
Steve, how does drama sell to audiences? God help me, I was literally thinking of a show that I'd watched the other day myself, talking about Nick something or other versus Bob Chicarillo. How do I know that? Because drama sells. It's gossip. It doesn't really matter. It's a bit of fun for 5 minutes. What you listen to this show for is factual information. We're going to talk about the reasons why people did what they do versus why they shouldn't perhaps do it now. We're going to do the back and forth. We're going to have the I agree, I disagree kinds of arguments. And we're going to do that so that we can open this stuff up to logic, to science, to if it's available studies and actual information. And in that way, guys, listen, you can. There's plenty of pages and sites and podcasts for entertainment. This is going to teach you the benefits or lack thereof of the reasons and why and the ways and methodology that you're using products in order for you to get the absolute best results you can. So whether it's a mistake or something that we agree with, whether it's something we practiced in the past but we don't practice now, so that you don't have to learn that the hard way. You can literally go in first cycle, second cycle, 10th cycle, and get the best results, the best outcome, the most muscle growth, the best recovery, the best weight loss that you possibly can without having to make mistakes, without having to learn the hard way. And that's the reason why we do these kind of shows.
All right, so let's have some fun on this. Let's start with the first topic: front loading. Does it work and how? So let me bring in Noah Wicks first. He hasn't had a chance to say anything yet. Let's have him touch on this first. Noah, what do you got to say on this topic?
I was finding a study, and I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this because I don't know if I really believe in this or if I don't because I'm not a fan of front loading myself. I typically use longer esters. I'm not really a short ester person yet because I haven't got to that point in my journey. But I was reading something and it was on front loading, and basically it says a lot of users in powerlifting and bodybuilding have started to front load steroid cycles every time a heavy ester is used, which is confusing to me because if it's a longer, heavier ester, it's going to take longer time to reach peak, like 6 to 8 weeks in the bloodstream anyway. So I don't really understand. But basically, the study was saying it's to eliminate delayed effects on body composition and strength. Many others merely jumpstart a cycle with orals or suspension drugs without an ester to allow quick absorption. Either method will boost blood levels up quickly to fully exploit the early responsive period, a time when the body is primed for growth and will best use the hormonal signals for amplified muscle growth. And then from what the study says, it says according to a basic pharmacology, a single dose of 250 milligrams of testosterone enanthate will deliver the parent hormone at its highest values the first 10 days. So from what it's saying is, so here's an illustration of it. It says the above cycle will illustrate testosterone enanthate administered at 250 milligrams every 3 days with and without a front load. The front load portion was accurately configured and applied with 500 milligrams on day one, 250 milligrams on day two, a day off, and then 250 milligrams every third day for the cycle's duration. The front load is 1,000 milligrams within the first 4 days, almost twice the weekly administered amount, 583 milligrams. Blood testosterone volume is immediately elevated and reasonably stable within the first week of the front load. And the caveat, it says non-front loaded administration did not elevate and stabilize blood levels until over 3 weeks after the cycle's launch. This is why results normally don't manifest themselves for many weeks without a proper front load. So what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Right. So at the end of this study, they should have had a list of individuals, the people that took part in the study, and it should have said something like those that didn't front load gained X pounds of weight, lost X pounds of body fat, put this much on their squat, whatever the methodology was for the study. And they should have another list of those that did front load, gained 2 pounds on average more, quarter of an inch on their biceps more, put 20 kilos on their bench more, whatever. And that, not one part of what you just said that. So straight away, and they also said something to the effect of the argument about being primed for growth at the beginning of a cycle. No, you're not. You're not. Right? If you and I do a cycle, Noah, I suspect our ability to lift more, have more endurance in the gym, etc., would grow through a cycle. We don't start day one, 500 milligrams, more in the first week, etc., and straight away, very, very quickly get stronger. Straight away, very, very quickly get more muscular. So they said prime for growth, but that's actually bro science right there. The argument becomes, and it's not included again in the way that you've read that, it might actually be in the longer version of the study because that normally the summation of the study. And this is just for the listeners. Most studies, and all of us that do this show are probably guilty of this. We read the summary, and then if it's of interest to us, we try to read the rest of the study. So the summary talks about prime for growth, but it doesn't mention the training protocol. So the only way that you do a study like this and have it work, and again, this would be those that front loaded versus those that didn't front load, would have them all do exactly the same training protocol, because otherwise you have too many variables, too many different things happening in order to be able to make the argument. So the only argument they can make here is blood tests and seeing elevated levels of testosterone in the blood with the front loaded versus those that did not. Well, that's great. It just means you had more testosterone in your blood quicker. Okay, what was the result? Apart from that, apart from being able to elevate the testosterone levels in the blood quicker, what was the result? Did group one have better gains than group two? Because ultimately, it's like saying if we were doing a narcotic recreational drug show, which one of us got the highest quickest? Well, big fucking deal. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean shit. It's just not a race to see who can have the quickest, highest testosterone levels. Any cycle, any show that we do should always be a benefit at the end beyond having the highest testosterone levels. Because otherwise, Steve, Noah, and I would all have a blood test and we put $10 on which one of us has got the highest testosterone levels just doing TRT. Oh, goody, I've won $20 off the guys. Congratulations. Am I stronger because of it? Am I more muscular? Am I leaner? Those are the results. That's the reasons why people listen to this show, because they want to be the leanest they've ever been. They want to be the strongest they've ever been. They want to have the biggest chest they've ever had. Having the highest testosterone levels the quickest should not be the aim of any cycle. So, I mean, I'm going to talk about the history and the reasons why people might have done it in the past, but the study doesn't give you that information. The study doesn't allow for that. So what do you think about that aspect of the study as well, guys?
Yeah, so let me point this out before I bring in Noah. So I was actually gonna say the same thing as Mobster. So we're kind of thinking the same way. And it's like, look, let's say the first 2 weeks, your testosterone levels, because you're front loading, are 200 to 300 nanograms per deciliter higher. So that's like, let's say if they're 25-30% higher than they would be otherwise, okay? Is that really going to grow your bicep bigger or make you stronger on your bench or make you stronger on your deadlift? That much of a difference over the long term? No, it's not going to make a difference over the long term. So just because, as Monster said, that just because your blood work is showing you've got more hormones in a quicker amount of, earlier, it
Yeah,
doesn't mean over the long term. Because if that was the case, like this is an example of of
The
it's so
idea of it
it's like
versus the reality of it.
it's like
Yeah.
the Ian McCarthy. Ian McCarthy was this nerdy kid. I don't know what happened to him now, but he used to be on social media like 10 years ago, and he had these wacky theories. And this is like the Ian McCarthy theory of if my blood work is 200 points higher on my testosterone levels, I'm going to make more gains, or I'm going to get bigger, or
Yes.
I'm going to get stronger. And in reality, in the long term, even in the short term, it doesn't mean shit. You know, it matters how you diet, how you
It's
train.
ignoring
How,
your training, it's ignoring your
yeah.
diet, it's ignoring your own physical response. Look, all three of us, and this is again for the benefit of the listeners, differ in our physiques. I would say, I mean, without, because we're not being insulting you, Steve is the shortest, then Noah, then myself. In terms of body weight, I would be the heaviest. I train for something different from what Noah and Steve do. Steve and I have had comparable bench presses. So our genetics differ. So therefore, even if we had exactly the same testosterone levels in our blood,
Well,
front loaded or otherwise, we would have different responses, and
well,
we
I'm the
train for different reasons.
I was gonna say I'm the biggest where it counts out of the three of us. That's the most
So
But you're
important
not
thing.
injecting the
yeah,
testosterone in your penis.
if we're going gym wise, I'm definitely the weakest out of the three. That's
But
for
you're
sure.
also the one that's most likely to compete and be on stage and arguably win a trophy. So
Yeah,
again,
that is true.
these are the things that, and the problem with sometimes stuff like this, including the studies and even the theoretical stuff that people perhaps did back in the day, is it was one of those things that on paper made sense. If I have high testosterone levels, my results should be good. Okay, we've done shows on people that have taken absolutely ridiculous amounts. I've used just recently, last week or the week before, Steve and I recorded a show, and I told the story about Pete Griminsky from Randy Roach's Muscle Smoke and Mirrors book, and you can find an actual quote for this online. There's a paragraph or two that tells you the story. Was taken at one point 10,000 milligrams. We talked about our own pet pro, the late Marco Louis, aka Monstro, being on 6 or 7,000 milligrams a week. My local gym owner is a huge user of PEDs when he's competing. And the heaviest he's ever been on stage, I believe, is 160 pounds. All three of us are relatively low users. And I would argue that all three of us outweigh my buddy in his normal condition, my gym buddy, the gym owner. So serious amounts of PEDs, 1,000 milligrams, 500 milligrams more than normal in the first week should, if you're going to do it, be of some benefit to you. I mean, look, we'll compare it briefly. Kickstarting is essentially using something else to start a cycle. Front loading is using more of what you were going to use anyway. And one of the arguments I've seen for front loading and or kickstarting is of a benefit to those who like to feel on. So if we use longer S's, and let's say for argument's sake, we're using Sustanon and Deca, one of my favorite bulking cycles, to begin with, there might be a week or two now because I'm on TRT, so that doesn't help. If I wasn't on TRT, there might be a week or two at the beginning when my training starts to increase, the loads in the gym, the volume. If I was Noah, might increase my ability to train harder, lift more weights, and do an extra set or an extra few reps starts to increase. It's going to be slow at the beginning and should peak at the end of the cycle. For me, in the past, when I've competed, I want to be my strongest at the end of the cycle. How I feel, my sense of well-being, how I feel on testosterone, doesn't really fucking matter. But for some people it does. And I think there's an element of there, perhaps more psychologically. If you feel on, you're more likely to kick ass in the gym. I'm gonna go tear shit up. I feel fucking great. So you go to the gym with that in your mind. But again, that's almost like a placebo effect because ultimately, how you feel, your sense of well-being, doesn't really count. It might do if that's your thing. It's the reason why lots of people like TRT. But does it really matter in the great scheme of things in terms of the end result? Absolutely not. It might, as I said, psychologically going on 500 or more milligrams that perhaps you might normally do, having your numbers elevated if you are particularly susceptible to elevated testosterone levels. I'm going to war, motherfuckers, and you're just my soldiers. I'm the general. I'm in the gym first. I'm going to kick ass. You're just there to follow me. That whole kind of vibe. And that might well be a reason why some people would still do that. The argument of priming or missing some gangs at the beginning of the cycle. That's bro science right there. And the idea that they've even included it in the study is kind of almost a joke. So let me segue a little bit of a reason into the history. Okay, so I'm familiar, and I bring the guys in because they're slightly different generations to me. I've talked about on another show or two, Muscle Media 2000, Bill Phillips magazine, back in the day, used to have a round table with the late Dan Duquesne and others, even including someone who shall remain nameless that Steve and I were talking about in the pre-show as one of their researchers, with the initial N and others. And it was a fun thing to do. I think John Romano used to occasionally take part. They would sit literally or over the telephone in a group call, and they would come up with a subject that they would talk about if they were having a coffee or they was having a beer in a bar or even around the counter at the gym. And they would do this almost in a scientific way. They would have the person I'd refer to go off and do a bit of research, see if there was any studies, and then they say, okay, this is a kind of idea that we're going to discuss, whether it was anabolic windows and protein consumption, which vegetable was better, what meat was better, and of course, PEDs. So the roundtable discussions were fun, and you could sometimes learn something from it. The research might back it up, as Noah's referred to. There's a piece of research there. Sometimes it would not. You also had, and I said this to Steve in the pre-show, the lack of availability. Those same people that I've mentioned just now would go over the border and have to go to the various pharmacia in Mexico. And they couldn't always get what they wanted. There were certain PDs that were famous if you could get them, if you can get this brand, if you can get the German stuff or the French stuff. We don't have any of those problems anymore. So one of the reasons why they might have front loaded back in the day is because they couldn't get all the orals. They couldn't get the shorter ester version. They could only get the longer ester version. They could only get preloaded. They could only get amps, not vials, and all those kind of issues. So, I mean, look, I've said on a show with Steve before, we did a show sometime before Noah, you can go on Wikipedia and you can find 100, I believe it's 121, don't quote me, but I think it's 121 anabolic steroids that have been created since 1960 something or other. In reality, we probably use about 20. The issue, as I've just discussed, is if we go back to the 70s, 80s and 90s, even in 2000s, you either had specific brands, and there was limited number of brands versus now, specific milligrams per milliliter that worked versus those that did not, so you had to inject more, and so on. So literally one of the arguments is availability. We have the greater availability, especially from companies like Beligas, who've done all the hard work for you with certain products and blends. Beligas has, I think, 100-something different products associated with peak performance enhancement. That's close to the number of steroids that have ever been invented. I think Steve and I was quite surprised at some of the combinations they'd come up with. Back in the day, I mean, look, when you guys first started, and even just your knowledge of the history of the sport, it was literally what the man had in the trunk of his car for most people, what you could get from the pharmacy when you travel, what you could get delivered to your house in the mail. Now we know with Beligas and companies like Beligas and the people that resell Beligas, we have 20 or 30 brands. And with Beligas, as an example, again, we've got 100-something products from one company. So if we go into the biggest name reseller, which I'm not going to mention on this show, you've probably got 400 or 500 different combinations or brand or combinations thereof. Back in the day, they had fucking shit, 10, 15, whatever the man had in the boot of his car that week. So talk about that a little bit, availability and the reasons why people used to do it as well, guys.
Yeah, go ahead, Noah. What are your thoughts?
The thing that I like most is, and I'm actually looking at the Beligas site right now. They just make it easy for guys like us who want to run lower milligram stuff. They have such wide array of options. Like even their Winstrol, for example, they offer a 20 milligram tablet of Winstrol, which is awesome because for somebody like me who likes to run low dose, I don't have to spend time cutting a pill up into fourths or whatever. I could literally just take a 20 milligram tab, easy peasy, done deal. They have everything. Like I'm just looking, like they've got semaglutide on here, decadurabolin, test prop, clomid. I mean, you name it. I mean, the list goes on. There's there's like 5 or 6 pages here of just different products, and everything's at a great price. And I have a lot of
Yeah.
experience with Belagas personally. My bridge cycle is actually all pretty much Belagas. And for me personally, moving forward, that might be the brand that is my brand. I
I've just counted the injectable options, and it comes to 61 different products. Just the
Yeah,
options.
it's insanity. Like, and like I have blood work on Belagas too. Like, even running low milligram with the Belagas Proviron and the Belagas testosterone zip, it's the highest levels that I've come in at so far with blood work. So for me, I just know this brand is high quality, it's potent, it's clean, it's easy to run, and it's something that I'm looking forward to running more in the future. I'm not sure what your guys' experience is with Belagas,
I
but
was
with
going to
mine,
ask Steve. Steve, what was your experience when you first started buying and using PDs versus your experience now, just historically?
Yeah, and I can remember 15 to 20 years ago, you'd have to buy on the internet from international and just hope it would get to you. It would take like 2 months just to even get to you. So I think a big reason why front loading may have been more practical for some people back then. It's like both of you said, the availability of steroids. You might not be able to get a hold of steroids again for another year. Maybe the guy selling the gear at the back of the van just stops showing up at the gym. Or
Yep.
as Noah said, maybe the source only has tabs that are big milligrams and you don't have the
Yep.
foresight to know how to split up the gear. Or maybe you just want to go higher. So I can remember 15.
Steve, you might remember this. One of the
Mhm.
things that used to be famous was like Pakistani in outfit, Iranian
Yeah.
testosterone cypionate, and it was vials only. You never got amps only,
Yeah,
no
amps. Yeah.
vials.
Yep. Yeah, so it would be amps only. That's a good point. So you pop over and they open the amp, and you'd have to use the whole thing. So you couldn't just like store it. It wasn't like vials that we have. Most sources are like Belagas has vials where you can just you could do half a cc if you want, and then just save the rest, or you could do 1 cc or 2 cc, whatever. Back then, I mean, you just pop over the amp. You got to use the whole thing right away. So it's a different thing. Another thing too on the forums 15, 20 years ago, I can remember there was a lot of guys pushing front loading. And what they would do is they didn't have the
Yes.
patience to wait. Let's say they were using Trembolone and Enanthate. They don't have the patience to wait 2, 3 weeks for it to reach peak levels in the system. They wanted
How
it.
many times, Steve, and I'll bring you back in for this, how many times have you and I talked about, and I think the greatest example was if it fits your macros, you'd have one person, and it's that classic analogy of the man that's sitting in his basement who'd read something once and comes across as a pro or guru. And so what you would have on a forum, and Steve's talked about this before, is someone who had a semi-decent physique, a little bit of knowledge, and they were kind of dangerous in that regards because those of us that were new would come in, and until we learn otherwise, we would take the advice of this quote unquote semi-pro, someone who competed once back in the 50s, whatever, as a person who knew what they were talking about. And sometimes, and this is it's all fields, you have someone who knows how to use the terminology well, sounds like an expert, won't let brook any kind of argument, and until you learn better and go off and do your own research and get your own responses and results, you listen to this person. And what Steve's just talked about, and I'll bring Steve back into this, is they were literally early days of the forums, lots of people like this. And so when they said, oh, you should front load, well, then I better front load then because X, Y, and Z said I should front load. Talk about that a little bit as well, Steve.
Yeah, and this kind of segues into our next topic, different strategies of Belagas front loading. So let's talk about, I'll give you an example of a guy I remember. He's a really cool dude. This guy was like a mad scientist. He was the kid in chemistry class in college or high school who would always try to blow up the chemistry lab, you know? So he used to make his gear as much as he could. He used to make other things as well that, aren't good for you. But what he would do, he loved Tren. And one of the things he would do with Tren, instead of running it at, say, 250 milligrams a week for 10 weeks, he would front load it. So he'd go 500 milligrams the first 4 weeks. Then he'd drop the dose to 250 milligrams the rest of the way. And what this would do for him is it would make the blood concentrations of the gear in his system quicker. So he would feel the gear in his system quicker, and he would feel the side effects, and he would feel the changes to his body. So it would hit him like a ton of bricks, and that's what he wanted. So he really wanted to push the envelope on this stuff, and he didn't want to wait 2-3 weeks for it to start peaking. He wanted to feel the results right away. So that would be one example. For example, if you want to use Tren, or let's say you wanted to do equipoise and you wanted to do 500 milligrams a week equipoise. Well, in that situation, because equipoise has a long ester, you'd start off with 1,000 milligrams of equipoise for the first 3 or 4 weeks, and then you drop the dose to 500 milligrams or even 400 milligrams. And then it would be higher concentrations in your system in a quicker time. And then as the steroid, starts peaking in your system, because remember, it's leaving your system and you're putting more in. It's leaving your system, you're putting more in. So if you understand the way esters work, as it metabolizes in your body, it's also leaving your body. Your body's going to be excreting it.
Yeah.
So the more you add initially, the more it's going to be in your system at a higher amount initially. So it's different than kickstarting. Kickstarting is not like front loading. So kickstarting example would be I'm running 12 weeks of testosterone SIP, and then
Yep.
I'm going to kickstart with some Dianabol the first 4 weeks, and then stop
Yes.
the
Yes.
Dianabol, and then the
Yep.
test SIP would be peaking. So front loading is not the same as that. Front loading is hiking up the dose maybe
Of
twice as
yeah.
much
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
3 or 4 weeks on a long ester. This way you feel it in your system. Or let's say on an oral. Let me give this example before I let you guys in. If you're running Dianabol, for example, instead of doing 25 milligrams of Dianabol for 6 weeks, you would do 50 milligrams the first 3 weeks, and then you drop the dose to 25 milligrams the rest of the way. This way, it's peaking in your system within days, and it's peaking you get higher concentration. So that would be some
Yeah.
examples.
I want to bring Noah back in, and there's a reason for this, right? So the great and vast majority of our listeners are never going to compete on stage. Therefore, with the exception perhaps of going on holiday or some kind of modeling gig, there really isn't a time restriction. So the time restriction might arguably, and I think Noah's got this in his not too distant future, and I'm bringing back in for this in terms of the thought that he might have at that time, and that is being stage ready. And I've said that some arguments are made on these shows for those that are going to compete and the availability, meaning the actual date that you're going to stand on stage. So let me give you an example, and I'll bring Noah in for this. You're going to do a 12, 16, or even a 20-week prep. There are stages to competition prep, competition protocols, and therefore the idea of getting as much growth as possible at the beginning, the idea of getting leaner and tidying up the diet in the middle, and the idea of absolutely tightening down every single thing there is at the end, really, so that those last few days you are stage ready, makes the most sense. So in those circumstances, and with half an eye on your future, perhaps competitive stage ready physique that you might bring to us on the forums and for yourself, Noah, think about that from that example, and what would your protocol perhaps be in those circumstances, and would you front load in those circumstances because you have a specific date that you need to be ready by?
That's an interesting question. For me personally, so my strategy this time around is going to be a little different, just based on what my coach and I have discussed. But I know a lot of guys want to front load, they want to get the results right away. I'm more of a back end guy. Like I would rather have my peak between week 8 and week 12 and be my strongest and get my maximum results growth wise in those last few weeks. I'm not
Yes.
one to rush a process. And to me, if I peak too early, I run the risk of coming in flat or being run down, or I'm tired, or I don't have the energy to hold a pose on stage. So with
Let me ask you a question, Noah. You actually talked about it in the pre-show, and this is for the benefit of the listeners again. If Noah wants to be on stage and at his absolute best, Noah thought that backloading, and you've just touched on it there, Noah, would be a much better protocol than front loading, because it doesn't matter what your physique looks like at the beginning. It only matters what you look like on stage. So talk a little bit in more depth about backloading specifically.
Yeah, so for for me with like with the backloading, so like what I plan to do for this one. So a lot of guys know that I'm going to be running around the 500 milligram mark of testosterone, 300 of masteron, in anywhere between 20 to 50 milligrams of winstrol. So what the goal is for this one, and it's interesting you touched on backloading because I'm not starting out at 500 milligrams right away. I'm actually going to be increasing every 2 to 2.5 weeks my dose of testosterone, and my dose of masteron. So it's not going to be heavy hitting compounds, max 975 milligrams right out of the gate. What my coach and I are going to do is it's going to be slow and steady increments building up to that 12-week mark. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to see how I respond as we slowly tick up the dose towards the back end to see how many results I can get towards that week, 8 to 12 week mark into the cycle. So for me, I feel that I'll mitigate a lot more sides by slowly titrating up as the cycle goes in to the 8 to 12 week mark, and I'll actually be able to notice better strength gains, better endurance, maximum muscle gain and benefit. Because for us, this is basically like a you know mini cut to see how close to stage ready I can get. And obviously, I'm not going to be stage ready. This is going to take multiple cuts and all that kind of stuff. But um, we actually are going to try and backload a little bit during this to see if my body responds better. Because up until this point, I've literally just been doing, okay, well, it's 300 milligrams of test. That's what I'm starting out with. Oh, it's 300 milligrams of masteron. That's what we're doing day one, week one. So this
Yeah.
time we're going to titrate slowly up to see if my body responds better long
Yes.
term, and if I can maximize my peak amount of muscle and vascularity and my sculpting of my structure and
It
shape
just occurred
towards
to
the
me,
back end.
guys. I realised now that we've talked about it and listening to Noah just then, I actually backloaded without even thinking about it on my last cycle. I was using my sus decker. I was trying to get a certain peak of strength, which I actually did on a couple of lifts. And I even put this in my log, and I completely forgot that that's what I was doing. It was just something I tried out without thinking of it as backloading. And I actually went up to the highest amounts. I believe typically the previous cycle and most of the 6 or 7 weeks that I was on cycle before I tried this was 1,050 milligrams, and that was sus, deca, and a little provaron, like we talked about on other shows. And I went up to 1,600 milligrams for the last 2 weeks. So ironically, I actually backloaded
How did
by
you
putting
feel?
more in.
Like
I
talk
didn't
about
like it.
that.
I didn't like it, and it didn't do much for my strength. I think I'd actually hit the peak on a couple of lifts in the middle of the cycle. My body weight didn't increase up to the kind of crazy levels it has in the past, so perhaps it's not going to do that anymore. I was still perfectly, 330 pounds, but I didn't hit the massive 336 that I previously did, which ironically was straight after a cut, so perhaps a bit of rebound. And I didn't really enjoy being on 1,600 milligrams. It didn't make my sense of well-being any better. It was a pain in the ass, not literally, because I like to use the quads to inject, but it required more pinning per week and so on and so forth. And if there was an idea that perhaps I was going to feel more beastly, more stronger, more aggressive in the gym, that didn't happen. So for me, it was like, no, 1,050 milligrams with the Bravara, and it's perfectly well, does the job. I didn't gain massive amounts of weight, fine, whatever, because really the aim of the cycle was about being as strong as I could. And
I
I
can
did.
agree with you on that. Like I don't really like that on feeling that guys talk about. Like I
Mm,
personally, I like to feel like I'm on nothing. The only time I like to feel it is when I'm in the gym. Like when I
I
get,
feel great right now, and I'm on TRT. I'm
I
not as
bet
strong
you
as I was
do.
before.
I bet you
I'm not as
do.
strong as I was before. It's fine. I'm literally
Well,
backing
it
off in
doesn't
terms of,
matter. Like you're
but
healthy.
I feel
That's
great.
the thing. Yeah, you feel great. And what a
Yeah,
lot of guys don't understand is like with this front loading thing, nobody thinks about this. They only think about, okay, I can get maximum muscle gain. I want to look like this. I want to be a
maybe.
beast. I want to
Yes,
be
yes,
shredded. But they
yes.
don't think about, oh my God, how much organ strain am I going to get with this? If I'm front loading 1 to 3 orals, if I'm front loading an
There's
injectable,
an
like
argument for and against, right? The for part is that I should, and again, I'm just referring to the days when I've competed, and I don't doubt this will be any different for you when you get to your absolute leanest. Okay, so we use some examples here as well. So when I'm pushing my absolute maximum back in the day to compete, I will feel god awful because I'm stressing my body and I'm taking it to places, including British, international, and world records that my body, no one's body, never mind my body's ever been before. And in terms of training, and this applies to bodybuilding on stage, being super lean isn't necessarily a nice thing. But the reality, again, for most people listening to this show, is that you should, even if it's only by virtue of how you look in the mirror, feel fucking amazed. Look at my six pack. Look at my veins.
yeah, that's
That
why I'm
should be
only
a
shooting
feel.
for
Yeah, it should be a feel good sensation.
yeah, and that's why, like, and this might be stupid, but like for me with like, Belagas and stuff, like when I get down to leaner and leaner, I probably, what, at some point I do want to try and like front load like a test prop or a mass prop and just kind of see like what I can achieve when I'm at my leanest. And this might sound stupid to a lot of people, but I'm a long term kind of guy. I'm not short term. I'm not narrow sighted. I'm not blinded by the gear or fast results. I want long
Give the
term
listeners a
quality.
sort of vague idea. We'll talk about Beligas products here, but just give the listeners now a vague idea of what you do in terms of dosaging and cycling, and then obviously perhaps as you've discussed with your coach, the idea, at least as pre-planned for the minute, of what you're going to do in order to get in shape again with milligrams per week, etc., of
Sure.
products.
Yeah, so I've talked about it in a couple episodes before, but I'll bring it up again just to kind of do like a refresher. But for me, I've actually gone back and forth with my coach on dosing, and I like to err on the side of caution. So at the beginning, it was going to be 50 milligrams of Winstrol tabs right out of the gate, and then we were like, okay, well, why don't we try 25 with the Belagas Winstrol? And then I was on the site last night because I was kind of looking at everything and putting stuff together and stuff. And then I was like, oh, they have a Winstrol Light that's 20 milligrams. That is right in my wheelhouse. So I
Yes.
spoke with my coach and he was like, yeah, we could do 20, for 8 to 10 weeks. I was like, perfect. Like, cause he understands, like, I have this constant fear of doing too much, putting my body through too much. And because if I go too much too soon, I'm going to wreck my mindset. I'm going to wreck my body. And then my blood work might be complete shit. So I'm looking at this from a scientific approach of how can I maximize where I'm trying to go and how I'm trying to look, but keeping mitigating factors in check and keeping long-term health more reasonable and sustainable. So for me, like the testosterone, 500 milligrams is the highest I'll ever go. This is set in stone with me and my coach. This is the first time I'm going to be trying it. But like I said, we're going to titrate up. We're not starting at 500 milligrams. We're going to
Yeah.
start at a dose of 250, which is what I'm used to. I know I can handle 250, 300, no problem. I've run it three
How
cycles.
long do you think that cycle might be, Noah? How long do you think you'll do this cycle as a way of getting into shape to see what's there?
12 weeks. I don't like to go over 12 weeks. Personally, I know some guys do 16 to 20, but that's just more organ strain. That's just more possible side effects. That's just more hits on your mental health and just running yourself down and risking injury and overtraining because we all know these steroids, they make you stronger, they boost your endurance, but they're also inflammatory in nature.
Yep.
So your immune system takes a hit, your body's going to take a hit. You need to train smart and think about the long term, not the narrow sighted short term. So
Yeah.
even with mass
What about
prop,
you, Steve? What would any thoughts on how you would run Beligas products with or without front loading, Steve? And if so, dosages and cycle length, etc.
So the way I would really maximize front loading would be to use longer esters and front load those, if that makes sense. Because what happens is I think you get more value that way. So as I said earlier, like with Equipoise or Primo, for example, if you're going to use those on a cycle, and let's say you're just running some testosterone with it, 200 milligrams of testosterone, keep your testosterone levels there. There's no reason to front load that. But what you could do with the Equipoise and Primo to have the blood concentrations higher within the first month is you just double up the dose. So instead of doing 400 milligrams, go 800 milligrams. Instead of going 500 milligrams, go 1,000 milligrams. And then you can go that route. And then that would be something that would work pretty good in that situation. And then this way you can kind of experiment and see, does it make a difference? Well, a lot of people, they get on cycle, they're really excited, they want to get the most out of the cycle, they want to feel it quicker. They
Yeah,
want to feel it
yeah,
quicker. They want to
yeah.
have that psychological edge where the first 4 weeks they're motivated to go to the gym. And look, honestly, like, yeah, it's a crutch for a lot of people, but that's the reality. Because when you're on steroids, you feel different. When you're on Belagas products, you feel different. When you go work
Potent.
out,
Yes,
you
yes,
get
yes.
more results. You maintain your strength. You get faster
Yep.
recovery. You're able to push more. You're able to do more volume. You
That
get
actually reminds me, Steve. Sorry, there's one of the things you and I have said on other shows, and I bring Nori back into this one is um, the reasons why people talked about feeling on is because we've got so goddamn used to underdosed poor products from crappy underground labs and products that weren't even what they said on the label versus using a company like Beligas where we know what we're getting. We know it's legit. I mean, just as an example, then, Steve, if you was running the way that you described, how long would you be on cycle for? Just again, for the benefit of the listeners, what's your preferred cycle length, including front loading, if you did so?
Yeah, so you'd be on, the front loading if you're doing a long ester, you want to go at least 12 weeks because, you're gonna go through all the trouble to front load. So you might as well push the cycle longer to kind of let the gains kind of flow, So that to me is an important way to do it. So that would be a good strategy, I think.
I'm just looking at products that they've got here and multiple options, as I said to the listeners earlier on. So I wouldn't front load. I'm all about the end results. Uh, as Noah said earlier on, arguably, and this comes down to training. If you're restricting your intake of food in order to get into shape, you're going to feel hungry. So the sense of well-being might come more from the results and how strong you are and hitting a PR or being lean and looking in the mirror and seeing veins on your abs and striations on your chest than it will from feeling hungry or feeling tired from training or feeling not recovered because you've just pushed a PR again and your body needs an extra day or two. So there's an argument back and forth in terms of the sense of well-being versus the sense of, and we just talked about this earlier, listeners, how you feel on TRT and when you're not pushing the envelope in terms of your recovery and so on and so forth, arguably feeling better. That's that happy medium somewhere between, testosterone levels kind of at normal. Certainly, mine would be higher than they would be for my age naturally, just on low dose TRT, versus me pushing the absolute envelope. And I've described this in the past. I've only once done a 16-week cycle, and that's because there were two competitions close together. Never again, thank you very much. Most of my cycles now are 8 weeks. I've done a few 4 weeks. 12 weeks makes more sense in terms of physique transformation, which is what Noah and Stevesmi are referring to. So, as an example, and I'm looking at the Beligas, I've made some notes as well while you guys were talking. I says they've got a testosterone esters blend, which actually says sus testosterone on the label. So that's a sustanon, and that's 250 milligrams, which is probably what I would go for. But they've also got two nandrolone versions, what Nandeca 300 and a Nandeca 500. Now, ironically, I have a Deca here, which is 500 milligrams, and I haven't used it. And typically, most of these come between 250 and 300 milligrams per milliliter. That would probably be what I would go for. And again, as per what I said earlier on, and what I've done on previous shows, we're looking at 2 injections a week, roughly one every 4 days. That pushed me up to, with the addition of Proviron, which they also have, would put me up into the 800 to 1,050 milligrams per week, which is perfect for me. Some element of, and this applies to the guys as well, is that we have an idea at this point, as we do these shows, as we are your show host, of what works for us, what our aims are, and how best to get there. Have we used products in the past which worked? Have there been products which worked for everybody else but didn't work for us, so we just didn't respond to them? We've got a good idea of how to train. We've got a good idea of how to diet, and so on and so forth. So we've got a great sort of way of manipulating our variables. When we do these shows and when we give out the advice, and some of the examples we give you listeners as well come from the general what would work for most people listening. Our demographic is somewhere between 18 and 25, as are most of these kind of shows. We have some listeners that are older. We also have some women listening. So just as an example, let me just throw this out there as a question for the guys. And this is just because it doesn't get discussed enough on these kinds of shows, guys. Women, is there a benefit for women to front load, or do we want them to stay on a low dose anavar, etc., that we would normally talk about on these shows, and would normally the kind of information that's thrown out there? Is there any benefit to women front loading in terms of results? And I think, again, specifically maybe with those that have got half an eye on doing bikini or open, etc., in bodybuilding.
I would say the only way you do it is if you're kind of on a deadline. If you've got, like you said, you got a bikini show coming up, you really want to get harder and leaner and
Yes,
drier.
yes,
So it's like
yes.
it's a last minute thing. So you really have to be careful as a female because the side effects are the thing you have to worry about when you come with front loading, because the side effects hit you a lot quicker. You're running a much higher dose. You're already running a PED dose
Yeah.
when you're running a regular cycle. Now you're running double that or triple that on top. And that can lead to big problems for females. So I would not do it as a female. I think it's too risky with the side effects, because side effects with females, I mean, they're bad enough with males, but imagine with females if you get yourself into trouble when it comes to side
Staying on too
effects.
long. I can think of a circumstance, and this might, you never know, Noah, this may well end up applying to you. We've had a couple of members on the forums that are desperately, and I say that in the nicest possible way, trying to get their pro card. I'm thinking of one particular person who's been hitting that for the last 2 or 3 years, regular competitions. What I've seen in professional bodybuilding is those that need to qualify for the Olympia, and the reasons why circumstances can and do change. As an example, I used it earlier on about me having a bet with the guys about who's got the highest testosterone levels, just as an example. You could have a challenge. We've seen another member on the forums talk about a challenge at the gym where everybody's putting $100, and the person who has the greatest gains, regardless of body weight, etc., wins the pot of money. And what sometimes happens in professional bodybuilding, if you have to get points, some sort of point system or qualification by winning a pro competition, is that you are second or third. You don't get to go through. So you have to do another competition within a relatively short period of time that enables you to still have a break and then compete at the highest level, the Arnold or the Olympia. If they had qualified earlier in the season, they get more of a break. Now they've got to stay on and compete again. So in those circumstances, the risk and reward, which I've used that analogy a couple of times recently, makes sense. It makes sense for people to front load because they've got a limited period of time, like Steve said. You have to be very careful with harsh anabolics for women. But again, it may well be the difference between getting a pro card, getting a supplement company contract or some sort of clothing company contract and sponsorship versus not. So would we advise them to stay on for 16 or 20 weeks? Maybe not. But now they've got to, because they missed that opportunity and other opportunities come up. Even literally being paid to compete. And you can only get paid if you do this competition. And your contract won't be renewed. It's that kind of thing. There are contracts there that you have to compete a certain number of times per year. You have to be able to get to the top 3 every single time. And the reward in the contract can be significant. It could literally double the amount of money that you win. So now you're into that kind of situation. Most people won't be there. For most people listening, and I'm going to include us guys at this point, it's about what we want, which is vanity and ego and wanting to be in shape just to have our best look or our best strength or whatever else. So again, situation historically differs from where we are now, the availability. Let me just use this as well, Steve, talking about this, and I'll cover this again in a moment, that Beligas has multiple cypionate options, multiple testosterone options, all the different ester variations that you could possibly want. I'm looking at Trenbolone Nanfate just on this page, and acetate. They've got it. They've got products, as I said, 50
Yeah.
something, 60
Yeah, that's
something products just on that. Yeah.
let me jump in and let Noah talk too. Let me just say this, like the flexibility you get today too makes it, not only makes it not necessary to front load, but also if you're into front loading and you can do it a lot easier because of the different esters. There's blends, like there's a Sustanon blend, for example, and the Sustanon is 4 different testosterone esters. They have other blends though as well with other steroids. So they have blends, or you can blend your own steroids in the same syringe and do it that way where you blend different types of esters at your leisure. So the amount of selection we have today in some ways may make front loading obsolete, but in other ways, if you're into front loading, it can make it more fun and more experimental. And as Noah said earlier, he wants to experiment with testosterone propionate for front loading. So in his situation, he can go to Belagas and they're a one-stop shop. They have the testosterone propionate, they have the enanthate, they have cypionate, they have sustanon blend, they have all kinds of options for you. And they have all kinds of different options when it comes to orals and injectables. So if you're going to try and experiment with front loading for yourself and you want to see what it can do for you, Belagas is a great, great way to do it with both orals and injectables, and then mixing things and blending things together. So it would be a nice little experiment for you all out there who to try it, and then let us know in the comments if it worked for you, what's your final verdict. And then those of you who've already front loaded, we'd love to hear your opinion on if you thought it was worth it, or if you thought, yeah, I did get some results, but long term, it really didn't make a difference in my style. Noah, what do you think?
I kind of wanted to go back and touch on Mobster, what he was saying about competition and how guys can sometimes, fall into having to compete multiple times and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff. And my opinion, like, and I could be totally wrong because I have zero competition history yet, but from my mindset, why didn't you plan better is my question.
I
It,
was going to touch on that. I was going
I'm
to touch on that.
serious.
You
Like,
carry on.
like
I'll touch
my
on that
my
in a minute.
whole my whole mindset is preparation. Like that's
Yes.
all I'm at 24/7, 365 is prepping. Like even now, I have a goal. Like I'm gonna try at my leanest to hold between 10 to 12% body fat year
Yes.
round. So that way, when we do a prep for 16 weeks, 20 weeks, we might not even need it because I'm already such low body fat that if I need to get to 5, 6%, I can
Yes.
maybe achieve that in 8 to 10 weeks and I'll have a peak physique and I don't have a reason to front load. I don't have a reason to backload. I could just run my normal, regular, conservative, moderate dosing and
Yep.
come in peaked right day one for the show. So my mind is like, if you guys are the type of person who are going to procrastinate and be underprepared, why compete?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So that's kind of like where I'm at because this whole journey for me is prepping and being ahead of the game and ahead of the curve
Yes.
and
Yes.
trying to manipulate to the point to where I don't have to strain my body or my organs as much as somebody else might have to
Let
because
me give you an example, Noah. You would have seen this. Your
yeah,
experience definitely would have seen this on the forums.
sure.
Every so often, someone comes on a forum and says, I'm getting in shape for my holiday. You can change that to wedding, bet with a buddy, whatever. And I'll say something like, and what's the time scale? And someone will say, oh, I've got 6 weeks or I've got 8 weeks. And you're like,
Drives me crazy.
yeah, what you listen, for me, you kind of know, unless you won a holiday in a drive-in, scratch card or something. Oh, I won a holiday at the gym. They've given me 2 weeks on the Bahamas. Oh, when you got to go? I'll go in 2 weeks' time. But you're out of shape. Okay, listen. If most people go away in the summertime or the spring or wherever, there's a certain times of year when most people on holiday. Start training for that shit in January. Don't start 6 weeks before when you're out of shape. You've been eating donuts and eating Cheerios while you're watching TV at night and donuts with your coffee every fucking day and haven't seen a leafy vegetable for the last 6 months. The classic example, and I've used this on other shows ages ago now, would be a young lady coming into the gym a little bit plump, a little bit out of shape, and standing there at the counter having my gym coffee, talking bullshit with the boys, and someone will come in and say something like, "Oh, have you got any clean root roll?" And the gym owner will rummage around and whatever else, and I'll say, oh, "What's this for, darling?" And they'll say, "Oh, getting ready for a wedding," and they might be one of the bridesmaids or even the bride. And you look at them and you think, "I'll tell you what you've done. You spent the most money." I'm not saying this, I'm thinking it. the most money in your life you're ever going to spend on a dress, which you had measured last year when you was in shape for your holiday. The wedding is in 6 weeks' time. If you suddenly decided you are too plump to get into the wedding dress, so now you've decided to get into shape. And the only way you're going to do that is by taking a cleanse that's probably going to make none of us are big fans of cleanse. Plenty of people use it, of course, and we've talked about it on these shows.
I'm not going to
It's
use it
probably going to make
actually.
you anxious. You're not going to, yeah, you need to eat cleaner. You need to be doing your cardio. You should have started this shit in January. You should have thought about that 800 pound $1,000 dress that's sitting in your wardrobe that's a size 11, and unfortunately you're a size 14. And listen, the majority of our listeners will be men. This is what applies here, guys. The necessity for you to front load is negated somewhat if, like Noah suggests, you are half ready. You've pre-planned. You've given yourself plenty of time. Something we discussed on these shows before I start to talk about Beligas guys specifically is the necessity and the flexibility of being able to change mid-cycle if something happens. If you break your fucking leg, you're probably not going to compete on stage with your leg in plaster. If your car's in a crash, if someone gets ill in your family, God forbid, the importance of a cycle goes out the window. So you might need to make changes. But if you're pre-planned, getting into shape, unless there's some sort of disaster, there's no reason for these last-minute changes. There's no reason to front load in order to be ahead of the curve somehow. And apart from the couple of examples that we've already given. So I agree 100% with Noah, 100% with Steve. It's one of those few shows where even if we do the back and forth, even if we try to think of reasons why people might do things, for the most part, all three of us agree. Plan in advance, pick a solid source like Beligas, make sure not to, as an example, when I do my training for competitions for a challenge, I will allow 1 to 2 weeks of shit results. Didn't quite lift as much as I should, wasn't on plan. Noah might do a thing for competition where he wasn't quite able to hit all his macros, missed 1 or 2 meal prep meals. But so long as he does enough of those on stage, in shape, ready for the day at the end of the cycle, it shouldn't suddenly require 2 more weeks. There shouldn't be sort of some massive deviation. God forbid there's no disasters. He should be in shape. And the same thing applies to the rest of you. So let's talk a little bit about Beligas as well, guys, here. Look, and I'll just talk to Steve in a pre-show about this. Came up on the forum the other day that someone was kicking off and was convinced that all companies use Chinese raws, etc. So let me start by prefacing with this. Beligas is a Belgian pharmaceutical company. It's not what we call a UGA. It's not that typical, even with some fantastic products and different brands that we talk about on these shows. This is literally a massive building in Belgium with all the kind of pharmaceutical licenses and all the data and all the restrictions that pharmaceutical companies have. It's not the typical kind of supplier or source for performance enhancement products. This is one where inspectors can turn up at any point and check the manufacturing process. That companies, local inspectors and quality control inspectors, local civic and federal authorities will have in Belgium can turn up and take products off the line and send them away to be tested. They will literally look at the books. There are certain restrictions when it comes to pharmaceuticals where products have to be, all the processes that are used to manufacture a product must be recorded. And not just association like ISO, but literally federal authorities. We have a thing in the United Kingdom called trading standards. We have the Food and Drug Administration in the States. I don't doubt for a second that Belgium's got something like that where these kind of people can turn up, knock on the door, show their badges, walk in and take products from the line, making sure that the pharmaceutical standards, cleanliness, and that kind of thing is adhered to at Beligas. So what do you think about that, guys?
Sounds like a place Body Monster would love to just visit, you know? Just walk in there and you know, just like look around. It's like a candy store, you know, for adults who
The only thing he
for me
visits is a trucking parking stop of Loves to get a lot lizard. Let's be real here. He doesn't venture outside of parking lots in shady areas. We all know this.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, look, Belagas, like I've used their gear many times. I know Mobster and Noah have as well. Look, it's fantastic gear. When you order from them, you know you're getting what you're getting. You know, it's like If you get testosterone and you run 500 milligrams a week, you know you're getting 500 milligrams a week. If you get Primo, you know you're getting Primo. If you get Anavar, you know you're getting Anavar. So high quality gear. They're fast when it comes to shipping. They're honest. They have great prices. I mean, unbelievable prices. You can, I mean, compared to where things were 15 years ago when it comes to getting a Primo cycle, you can get a Primo cycle where it's affordable. And 15 years ago,
What was
you
that?
got this.
What was that thing that you and I talked about before, Steve? When you and I first investigated or researched Beligas, we were amazed by the number of products where the blends was like a cycle that we would do. Steve talked about mixing products together in a vial and injecting them that way. But Beligas had multiple blends where they literally said, what are users going to use? What sustanon testosterone ratio would they use on cycle? Let's make a product that's put together that way. I think we was looking at one of the resellers, and I said 61 injectables earlier, and I think actually the blends was like 13 or 14 different blends of the way that you listeners would run a cycle. So you didn't have to buy two products. You brought one product because Beligas had already done the work for you. What about that, Steve?
Oh, absolutely. And look, Balagas has excellent orals, injectables, ancillaries, PCT products. They have things like they have other things too. They have the peptides. They have all kinds of different things, fat burners, dick drugs, all kinds of things you may need or something you may want. So they provide it all. And as you said at the beginning of the show, Mobster, they have so many
Yeah.
products that you can just go on there and look and different types. So if you do want to do the front loading or the back loading or the kick starting or all this other stuff, you have flexibility because they have the different products that allow you to do it. No,
No,
what are your yeah.
no, you said about your experience using their products. So tell the listeners about your own experience and why you'd recommend them for the future.
Yeah, actually, interesting story. One time, before I get into that, I actually emailed Belagus one time, and within a day, they actually responded with a real person and got back to me, which I found pretty incredible because I was like, I didn't expect anybody to answer me, but they literally like thanked me for using their product and got back to me, and I was like, well, that's kind of cool. I didn't think anybody would answer me, but just for the level of service you get with them, you actually will have somebody who will actually answer your question in an email if you do use the email that they provide. Um, but yeah, speaking of fat burners, like Steve was talking about too, I found it interesting. I look at a couple different sources here and there, and I found it interesting that they have Clen at 40 micrograms with 5.5 milligrams of yohimbine combined. That's a pretty interesting injectable that they offer. But for my own experience, I've I've used their Beltropin before. I've used their testosterone, their NPP, their Masteron, their Proviron. Everything is phenomenal and high quality, and the packaging looks great. The presentation is great, and the results are great. I know for me, even on just the 250 milligrams of testosterone a week and 20 milligrams of Proviron, I've seen really great results. I've felt stronger than I've ever felt, and I just even their oils. Like I was kind of looking at it, and I like to compare different oils because I've
Yeah.
used different products before, and it amazes me how thin their oil actually is, which is amazing because when you're injecting intramuscularly, that thin oil goes a long way to prevent PIP and knot in
Yeah. Yeah.
things of that nature. So I'm actually just impressed that they can thin their oil as much as they do. So anybody who's used it like you guys, you know what I'm talking about. It almost feels watery. It's kind of crazy, but really cool in
Something
that way.
I really like, and I think Noah just mentioned it just then, and I've actually said this when we talked about the way products are presented, and we talked about going to a pharmacist in the States, going to a chemist, as we call them here in the UK, and behind the counters, you've got over the counter products, and then you've got prescription products, scripted products that your doctor or your MD is giving you. And there's a sort of look that all pharmaceutical companies use, which differs somewhat from UGLs. The better UGLs do this, but Beligas again is an actual pharmaceutical company. So one of the things that it's literally like the whole put a man in a white coat, he looks like a doctor, present products in a certain particular way, and you instantly think pharmaceutical. So, for example, and again, I've looked at I'm looking at the weight loss products now. I've looked at the injectables. I was looking at the injectables, the oral, sorry, a few minutes ago. And again, this is a pharmaceutical company, so they have that look. I've described on another show, and I literally saw one this morning that actually looked professional. Our Oz Forum members, bless them, and to some small degree the Canadians, because of the size of the market and because of the difficulty of getting products into the country, some of the products are very, very basic looking. Done on a laser printer in the person's house. There's no holograms. There's no indented uh, dates and batch numbers. Stuff can be pre-printed. The labels might be wonky, but the product can be fine and so on. I have seen UGLs where the best, and I use this example when I stay with Steve, they put a vial on the front page of the site of, say, let's say testosterone cypionate, for example, and the label's wonky. And I think, you motherfuckers, it's literally the front page of your website. Straighten the fucking label before you take a picture and put it on the front page of your website to sell your products. So Beligas looks like what it is. They with their strips. I'm looking at the weight loss products. Everything is a proper tablet in a strip that you push through the film. The film will have the batch codes. The film will have the Beligas label everywhere. I'm looking at it's got those codes on the front that you can scan with your telephone. There's indented imprint of the Beligas graphic on the front of the box. The boxes will have on the end will be batch numbers indented, not just printed onto the cardboard or as a film, but actually indented into there. So it's been done by a machine, and each number will change, and the date will change according to how many produced on that particular day or that week or that month. These are things that make you trust products. Better companies do, but Beligas does this all the time. So Noah says this, and I was just looking at this. Talk about the authentication code before we finish the show, Steve. Noah.
So the thing that I like is, a lot of UGLs will do that. They'll slap on a code, and depending on the source, you enter the code and then you find out rather quickly that it's bunk or it doesn't work or it leads you to a URL that's not even active. The thing that I love about Beligas, I've used several products from Beligas, and the thing that I love the most is scratching off the authentication code and going to the website and putting it in. And I can tell you, from the Beltropin to the test to the Proviron to the NPP to the Masteron, everything I've put in has been 1000% authenticated and real from Beligas. So the thing that I like about us is the source that we use that does carry the Beligas. You know that it's 100% a Beligas product each and every time you get it from there. And that's the difference, is finding a quality source like the one we have access to for Beligas that are authentic Beligas, because
inherently trustworthy. Inherently makes you trust the product, doesn't it, Noah?
Yep. And that's kind of the thing, like being a part of the evolutionary.org, community, which is where you can find the quality source for real Beligas. That's the big difference. Like when you have a community like that and you know that you can trust the sources 100%, you'll have confidence when you run your cycle, because you know what you get is exactly what you get, and you'll get it each and every time.
This is a reason, listeners, that we encourage you to share this show and to like the show, subscribe to this show, because just as an example, we've had companies that have been great for years, and the moment they drop the ball, we drop them as approved sources. It was literally product was great, then suddenly the product wasn't great. They let people down, they took people's money, they were gone. They disappeared off the site in a day, because we do not want that kind of association. We don't want to provide you with bad information. We want good information. We talk about Beligas a lot because they are a pharmaceutical company, because you can go away and do these kind of code checks that people want to do. And it makes you trust our information. It makes you trust the product. And look, guys, you're spending your hard-earned money to get good products for you to go out when you're working your asses off in the gym, when you're going with that extra food and treats, when you're putting in the extra steps every single day, when you're religiously getting your cardio, and you want to be in the best shape, the strongest, the leanest, the most muscular you've ever been, male, female, young or old, then you want to be able to turn around and say, should I front load? I'll listen to that show that the guys have put out. Should I use this company's products. Yes, yes, and yes. This is the way that we want you to put the information out for you, that we want you to be able to check this product is great, and so on and so forth. It's why we give Beligas a massive thumbs up. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast of informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.